Welcome to the Sleepy Geographer, a place where maps meet dreams and where the wide landscapes of our planet turn into quiet stories for the night. If you are settling down for rest, this is your time to slow your thoughts and let the earth itself tell you a tale. Tonight's journey takes us to the Sahara, the world's largest hot desert, though not in the way you know it. We're travelling back to a time when this sea of sand was a land of lakes and rivers, a green plain alive with animals and people. Before we begin, I would love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop a note in the comments and share your corner of the world. It is always wonderful to see this little community stretching across the globe. If this calm exploration helps you unwind, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot. To those of you already subscribed, thank you for being here. Your presence is what makes these journeys possible. And just a gentle warning, I hope this story is not so fascinating that it keeps you wide-eyed instead of heavy-lidded. But if it does, at least you will drift away a little wiser when sleep finally arrives. So how can the driest place on Earth hold the memory of rivers and grasslands? The Sahara today feels eternal. Its golden dunes roll for thousands of kilometres, its heat can bend the air itself, and its silence stretches wider than entire countries. To stand in the desert is to feel as though it has always been this way, dry, empty, and unchanging. Yet, this is only a trick of time. The Sahara has not always been the desert we know. Beneath the sand lie traces of a different world. Fossil bones of hippos, crocodiles, and elephants lie buried under dunes. Ancient shorelines curve across the desert floor, and rock art carved into caves shows hunters, herders, and swimmers. These are fragments of an older Sahara when rain fell freely and the desert bloomed with grass and trees. This period is known as the African humid phase, a time when Earth's slow rhythms shifted the rains northward. For thousands of years, the Sahara was not a barrier but a bridge, linking people, animals, and ecosystems across Africa. The desert that now swallows caravans once nourished cattle, crops, and cultures. What happened to this world of rivers and savannas? Why did it vanish so suddenly, leaving behind sand and silence? And could the Sahara bloom again in the future? The answers lie in the cycles of our planet, in the way Earth tilts and wobbles in space, in the fragile dance between rainfall and vegetation, and in the enduring memory of stone and dust. Tonight we will follow these clues like footprints across shifting sand, piecing together the story of a desert that is far more alive than it seems. And so, let us step quietly into the past, into the Sahara when it was green. The Sahara has always seemed like the very definition of a desert, an endless ocean of dunes, a land so dry that entire empires trembled before attempting to cross it. To outsiders, it feels eternal, a place that must have been the same since the dawn of time. The very word Sahara comes from the Arabic for desert, as though no other description were necessary. For travellers, adventurers, and storytellers, the desert is a symbol of both beauty and danger, a world that offers silence, mystery, and occasionally mirages that dance on the horizon. Yet appearances can be deceiving. To call the Sahara timeless is to forget that the earth itself is always in motion. The sand may give the impression of permanence, but underneath lies a record of astonishing change. Hidden below those rolling dunes are clues to a very different Sahara, one that was once green, fertile, and alive with rivers and lakes. The desert as we know it today is a mask, a shifting surface that conceals a forgotten landscape. When modern visitors step into the Sahara, they often describe the scale first. The desert covers more than 9 million square kilometres, stretching across 11 countries. It is larger than the entire continental United States. Stand on a high dune and the horizon looks like it curves away beneath you, as though you are seeing not just a desert, but an entire planet made of sand. The sheer immensity is part of its illusion. It feels too vast to have ever been anything else. The mind resists the idea that this could once have been a savannah, rich with grass, trees and animals, but there are reminders, even in the present landscape. Scattered across the desert floor are dry riverbeds, wadis, that twist and turn like veins cut into the earth. Some of them are so wide they could rival major modern rivers, yet they hold no water except after rare storms. Look from above, through the eyes of satellites, and the patterns become unmistakable. Vast drainage systems that once carried rivers across thousands of kilometers. These ghost rivers are silent testimony that the Sahara has worn more than one face. The illusion of endless sand also hides the memory of lakes. Beneath the desert surface, geologists have traced the outlines of vanished inland seas. Lake Chad, which today is a fraction of its former size, once spread far beyond its modern boundaries, so vast it could have rivaled entire European countries. Other now vanished giants, like Lake Megaphezon in what is now Libya, would have shimmered across the horizon, attracting people, animals, and vegetation to their shores. Imagine looking across a watery expanse in the very heart of the Sahara, where now only dust and dunes remain. For ancient travellers, the desert's mask was no less convincing. Caravans braved the Sahara for millennia, moving salt, gold, and ideas across its expanse. To them it was already a place of danger and mystery. The thought that hippos once wallowed here or that crocodiles patrolled rivers would have seemed as fantastical as a mirage. Yet the bones tell the story clearly. Fossils and remains lie buried beneath the sands, waiting for winds or archaeologists to uncover them. The Sahara is not so much barren as it is secretive. Part of what makes the desert seem eternal is its power to overwhelm the senses. By day, the sun bakes the ground until it shimmers like molten glass. By night, the stars blaze so brightly that the sky feels close enough to touch. Winds sweep across dunes, sculpting them into curves and ridges that shift year by year. These movements disguise the slow passage of deeper time. When you're standing in the middle of this immensity, it is easy to forget that the Earth's climate has swung back and forth many times, turning deserts into grasslands and grasslands into deserts again. And yet, if you look closely, the signs break through the illusion. Rock art carved into caves and stone shelters shows scenes of swimming figures, of cattle grazing, of giraffes striding across savannas. These images were not born from imagination but from memory. They are windows into a time when the Sahara's mask was lifted, when rivers flowed and the land bloomed. For the people who lived then, the desert was not a desert at all, it was home. What creates this illusion of permanence is not just the vastness of the Sahara, but the way humans experience time. A few thousand years feels endless to us, but to the Earth, it is barely a blink. The last time the Sahara was green, people were already herding cattle and building communities, yet that world has vanished so completely that only traces remain. When you measure time in lifetimes, deserts look eternal. When you measure time in the rhythms of the planet, they are simply chapters in a much longer story. The Sahara then is a paradox. It is the ultimate desert, the world's great wilderness of sand, but it is also a palimpsest, a landscape that has been written over again and again. Beneath its mask lie rivers that once carved valleys, lakes that stretched across hundreds of kilometers, and animals that would look very out of place today. Every gust of wind that moves the dunes is part of this masking process, covering and uncovering the past. Perhaps this is why the Sahara captivates so many who see it. It feels eternal, but in truth, it is fragile. It seems empty, but it hides abundance. It looks unchanging, but it has transformed utterly in living memory of the earth. The illusion of endless sand is powerful but not unbreakable. When the dunes whisper in the wind, they carry with them echoes of grass, water, and the footsteps of those who lived in a very different Sahara. The desert may appear to be a land without history, but look closer, and you will see it as a master of disguise, a shapeshifter that hides its past beneath the most convincing costume of all, silence and sand. From the ground, the Sahara seems to tell a very simple story. sand as far as the eye can see, broken only by bare rock outcrops and the occasional hardy shrub clinging to life. Yet the desert is a master of concealment, hiding a far more complicated past beneath its surface. What looks like emptiness is in fact a vast archive, and when you peel back the dunes, the Sahara reveals memories of rivers, lakes, and entire ecosystems now gone. Some of these traces are subtle, almost invisible to the casual eye. Others are written on a scale so large that you need to rise above the earth itself to see them. Geologists have long known that deserts can change their appearance, but the Sahara's hidden landscapes are something else entirely. Beneath its shifting sands lies evidence of enormous lakes that once glittered in the sun, of river systems that carved valleys across thousands of kilometres, and of wetlands that stretched wider than many modern nations. The desert we see today is not a static place. It is the last stage in a long transformation, and every dune is part of the disguise. Take Lake Chad, for example. Today it appears as a shrunken body of water at the edge of the desert, clinging to life in the borderlands between Nigeria, Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. In the last half-century alone it has shrunk dramatically, reduced to a fraction of its mid-20th century size, but this is only the latest chapter in a much longer saga. In the distant past, Lake Chad was a true giant. At times during the humid phases of the Sahara, it swelled to become one of the largest freshwater bodies on Earth, a vast inland sea sometimes called Mega Chad. At its peak it may have spread over 360,000 square kilometres, dwarfing even the Caspian Sea. Its ancient shorelines can still be traced in the desert today, curling like faded scars across the landscape. They are so broad that they are best appreciated from satellites, their arcs stretching for hundreds of kilometres, outlining a vanished inland ocean. And Lake Chad was not alone. In the heart of Libya, geologists have reconstructed the existence of Lake Megafezzen, a colossal body of water that once filled the Fezzan Basin. It covered tens of thousands of square kilometres, and when it evaporated it left behind salt flats and sediments that still carry the chemical signatures of its watery past. Elsewhere, paleolakes known only through their ancient shorelines dot the desert, silent witnesses to a time when rainfall was plentiful, and rivers poured down from the highlands. The story of rivers is no less remarkable. One of the most striking is the Wadi Hawa, sometimes called the Yellow Nile. Today it lies as a dry channel stretching across the eastern Sahara, but in the past it was a thriving river system, a green corridor that connected Central Africa to the Nile Valley. Flowing for more than 1,000 kilometres, it supported not only animals, but also the movements of people who followed its fertile banks. Its traces are so distinct that from space it appears as a great scar running across the desert, an echo of a vanished waterway. Satellite technology has been a revelation in uncovering these hidden landscapes. Looking down from orbit, scientists can see what the human eye at ground level cannot. Broad drainage systems, former lake basins, and river channels preserved beneath the sand. Infrared imaging can pick out moisture locked underground, hinting at aquifers that are the last remains of ancient rainfall. Radar instruments, which can penetrate beneath the sand, have revealed networks of channels long buried, showing that the Sahara once had a drainage system rivaling those of the world's major river basins. Perhaps the most famous discovery came from the Shuttle Radar Topography mission, which mapped the Earth in exquisite detail. In the Sahara, it revealed the unmistakable outlines of great rivers and lakes hidden under dunes, confirming what geologists had long suspected. Some of these channels are thought to have fed into the Nile itself, suggesting that the Sahara once funneled water northward into one of the world's most fertile valleys. These are landscapes you cannot see when you stand in the desert, but from hundreds of kilometres above they leap out of the sand like fingerprints of time. Dunes themselves are both archivists and erasers of this history. They move slowly, driven by prevailing winds, burying evidence beneath metres of sand. Entire fossil beds, ancient tools and long dry shorelines lie entombed under their shifting slopes. But dunes are fickle custodians. Just as they conceal, they also reveal. A strong storm can scour away their surface, exposing stone tools left by Neolithic herders or bones of animals that once grazed on grasslands. The desert is constantly rearranging its mask, hiding one piece of its story while offering up another. Beneath the Sahara's surface, scientists have drilled cores that bring up sediments telling tales of wetter days. Layers rich in pollen from savanna plants, microscopic shells of freshwater organisms, and deposits of clay carried by flowing rivers all speak of a land that once supported abundant life. In some places, these cores go back hundreds of thousands of years, showing cycles of greening and drying that repeat in rhythm with the Earth's tilt and orbit. Each layer is like a page in the diary of the Sahara, a diary written in mud rather than words. For local people, these hidden waters still matter. Aquifers formed during the Sahara's wetter past remain a crucial source of life for modern communities. Wells in places like Libya's Fezzan or Egypt's oases tap into these ancient reserves. Fossil water locked underground since the last humid period. It is a paradox that the driest place on Earth relies on water that fell as rain thousands of years ago. Every sip taken from an oasis is a taste of the green Sahara itself. The traces of ancient rivers and lakes are not just curiosities, they're reminders of how dynamic the Earth's surface is. A desert can be a savannah, a sea can dry to dust, a river can become a trail of stones. To stand in the Sahara today is to be fooled by its mask of permanence, but to look beneath is to realize that change is the only constant. The dunes, in their slow march, are sculptors of illusion. They whisper of barrenness, but beneath them lies abundance long forgotten. When satellites pass overhead and scientists read the landscape from orbit, the Sahara's mask is briefly lifted. Dry channels glow faintly on the screen, outlines of shorelines appear like ghosts, and the desert's true story comes into focus. The sand may dominate the surface, but the memory of water is written everywhere, in sediments, in fossils, in hidden aquifers, and even in the very shape of the land. The desert that seems empty is in truth crowded with memory. Its dunes are like a curtain that falls and rises, alternately concealing and revealing the stages of a drama that has played out over millennia. What lies beneath is a reminder that no landscape is fixed forever, not even one as vast and overwhelming as the Sahara. The desert's silence is deceptive, for under the hush of wind and sand lies the echo of rushing rivers and the shimmer of vanished lakes. It is hard to picture a hippopotamus lumbering across a Saharan dune. The animal seems so mismatched with the image of endless sand that it almost feels like the start of a surreal cartoon. Yet this is not imagination. Fossil evidence scattered across the desert tells us plainly, hippos really did once wallow in the lakes and rivers of the Sahara, and they were not alone. Giraffes grazed where dunes now roll, elephants trampled the grasslands, and crocodiles slithered through wetlands that stretched far and wide. The Sahara we know today is an arid wilderness, but these animals are proof that it was once a thriving ecosystem bursting with life. The presence of hippos is especially revealing. These creatures are tied to water in a way that few large mammals are. They spend most of their lives in rivers and lakes, emerging mainly to graze under cover of darkness. Finding their bones in what is now hyper-arid desert means there must once have been permanent deep bodies of water, not seasonal puddles, not short-lived streams, but stable lakes and wide rivers capable of sustaining large herds year after year. A hippo in the modern Sahara would be as bewildered as a polar bear in a rainforest. The sand would leave it baffled, its heavy body sinking into dunes where once it floated with ease. The fossils we uncover remind us that the desert's present face is just one stage of a much more varied history. Giraffes, too, left their mark on the green Sahara. Today they roam the savannas south of the desert, browsing the treetops of acacias and other hardy species. Their fossils in the Sahara show that tall trees once dotted the landscape, enough to support populations of these elegant browsers. A giraffe cannot survive on shrubs or sparse grasses. It needs woodlands and tree-filled savannas. To imagine giraffes striding where we now see sandstorms is to realise just how lush and vegetated the Sahara once was. And then there are the elephants. These giants have an enormous appetite, consuming hundreds of pounds of vegetation each day. Fossilised remains of elephants, along with ancient depictions in rock art, reveal that herds once roamed across the Sahara's plains. Their presence confirms that grasslands and woodland mosaics once blanketed regions that are now barren. For elephants to flourish, the environment must have been rich, productive, and capable of sustaining large mammal communities. The thought of elephants trudging across a meadow where today the wind drives waves of sand is as striking as it is humbling. Crocodiles may be the most surprising of all. They are creatures of rivers and wetlands, sunning themselves on muddy banks and sliding into water with barely a ripple. Yet their fossils, and in some places their continued survival in isolated desert oases, prove that they once thrived across the Sahara. In certain hidden pockets of Chad and Mauritania, small groups of crocodiles survive to this day, relics of the green Sahara that managed to hang on long after the rains vanished. These living fossils are like whispers from the past, reminders that the desert once rang with the splash of reptiles slipping into wide rivers. The collection of species found in the Sahara paints a vivid ecological picture. To support hippos, giraffes, elephants and crocodiles all at once, the region must have been a complex mosaic of habitats. Rivers and lakes provided homes for aquatic species, while grasslands spread across the lowlands, feeding elephants and antelopes. Woodlands dotted with tall trees fed giraffes, while predators such as lions and hyenas likely roamed alongside them. Fossil evidence, combined with rock art depictions, suggests an ecosystem that looked far more like today's East African savannah than the desert wilderness we see now. What these animals tell us about climate is clear. The Sahara must have received abundant and regular rainfall. The African monsoon, driven northward during certain orbital cycles, transformed the desert into a fertile expanse. Vegetation spread, soils built up, and lakes filled. The rivers were not short-lived torrents, but reliable waterways, allowing hippos and crocodiles to thrive. The air must have been alive with birdsong, the ground buzzing with insects, the nights filled with the calls of frogs and the distant trumpeting of elephants. The fossil record also tells us that this greening was not a brief anomaly. It lasted thousands of years, long enough for ecosystems to stabilise and for large animal populations to flourish. If the rains had only returned for a few decades or centuries, these species could never have established themselves so successfully. Instead, the Sahara's humid period created an enduring paradise that supported humans and wildlife alike. There is a gentle humour in imagining what those hippos, giraffes or elephants would think if they returned today. A hippo trudging out of a dune, expecting to slip into a cool lake, would be horrified to discover nothing but sand as far as it could see. A giraffe craning its neck skyward would find no tall acacias, only heat shimmer rising from bare rock. An elephant sniffing the air for grass would find its vast appetite entirely unsatisfied. The crocodiles at least might make a go of it in an oasis or two, but even they would soon discover that the Sahara no longer has the watery abundance they once knew. This contrast between past and present is part of what makes the Sahara story so compelling. Fossils of water-loving hippos and crocodiles serve as undeniable evidence that this desert was once transformed. Without them, it would be tempting to dismiss the idea of a green Sahara as fantasy. But bones do not lie, and rock art cannot be wished away. Together they form a chorus of testimony, telling us that the Sahara was once a thriving home for animals that today we only associate with wetter, greener landscapes. For geologists and archaeologists, these fossils are invaluable. They do more than confirm the existence of past ecosystems. They help pin down the timing of climate shifts, the distribution of species, the layers of sediment they are found in, and the ages of the rocks that entomb them all allow scientists to reconstruct the Sahara's changing face. Each hippo jaw or elephant tusk is a clue, another piece in the grand puzzle of how deserts emerge and disappear. What makes this even more extraordinary is the scale of change. Within the space of a few thousand years, a blink of an eye in geological terms, the Sahara went from supporting massive populations of megafauna to becoming a land so hostile that even small shrubs struggle to grow. The animals could not adapt quickly enough to the loss of water and vegetation, and their ranges retreated southward, following the rains as they shifted. The desert claimed their former homes, burying the remains in sand and silence. And so, when you look out across the Sahara today and see its stark emptiness, remember the secret it hides. Beneath the dunes, the bones of hippos lie where they once basked in shallow lakes. Fossil giraffes rest where acacia trees once swayed. Elephant remains are scattered where herds once roamed, and crocodile skeletons mark the edges of rivers that have not flowed in thousands of years. The desert, in its current form, is only a mask pulled tight across a far greener past. The fossils remind us that even the most extreme landscapes are not eternal. The Sahara, for all its heat and silence, has been as alive as any savannah, and one day, under the right conditions, it may be again. For now, though, its dunes whisper of a vanished menagerie, of creatures that would be utterly astonished to find themselves standing in the desert today, searching in vain for water, shade, and grass. The illusion of endless sand is powerful, but the bones beneath it tell a very different story, a story of life where none seems possible. To understand how the Sahara could have once been green, it helps to look far beyond the desert itself. The answer lies not only in Africa's skies or its rivers, but in the slow, steady dance of the Earth around the Sun. Climate is not just a matter of weather systems and seasons, it is tied to the geometry of our planet's orbit. Over thousands of years, small shifts in that orbit nudge the climate in one direction or another, pulling monsoon rains north, or pushing them south, greening deserts or drying savannas. The Sahara, more than almost any other landscape, bears the imprint of this planetary rhythm. Scientists call these shifts Milankovitch cycles, named after the Serbian mathematician Milutin Milankovic, who in the early 20th century worked out how subtle variations in Earth's movement through space could influence long-term climate patterns. There are three main elements to this cosmic choreography: eccentricity, obliquity, and precession. On paper, these sound like terms borrowed from a physics exam, but in practice they are the levers that turn deserts into grasslands and back again. Eccentricity refers to the shape of Earth's orbit around the Sun. At times, the orbit is nearly circular, at other times it stretches into a more oval path. This cycle takes about 100,000 years to complete, and though the difference may sound small, it changes the amount of solar energy Earth receives during different parts of the year. When the orbit is more elongated, seasons become more extreme, with warmer summers and colder winters. Obliquity, or axial tilt, describes the angle at which the Earth leans relative to its orbit. Right now, that tilt is about 23.5 degrees, but it wobbles between roughly 22 and 24.5 degrees over a 41,000-year cycle. A greater tilt means the poles receive more sunlight in summer, intensifying the contrast between seasons. A smaller tilt softens the seasons, making them milder. Finally, there is precession, often called the Earth's slow wobble. Over about 26,000 years, our planet gently rocks like a spinning top that is not perfectly upright. This changes the timing of the seasons relative to Earth's position in its orbit, shifting when summer or winter occurs in each hemisphere. It may not sound dramatic, but combined with tilt and eccentricity, it has a profound influence on where rainfall falls and when. Together, these cycles affect how much solar energy reaches different latitudes during different times of the year. In North Africa, the effect is particularly striking. When the cycles align in certain ways, they strengthen the summer monsoon, that annual migration of moist air masses from the tropics that brings life-giving rain. Normally, the West African monsoon delivers heavy rains to the Sahel region just south of the Sahara. But when orbital changes push the monsoon belt northward, it can extend deep into the desert itself. Rain falls where today there is almost none, filling rivers, replenishing lakes, and carpeting the land with vegetation. This was the secret behind the Green Sahara. During the African humid period, roughly between 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, the orbital cycles worked together to boost summer insolation, the amount of sunlight striking the northern hemisphere during summer. Stronger sunlight heated the land more intensely, which in turn drew in moist air from the Atlantic Ocean. The monsoon rains shifted northward, blanketing the Sahara with water. It was not just a drizzle or occasional storm, but sustained, predictable rainfall year after year, lasting long enough for ecosystems to flourish and for human societies to thrive. Think of the Earth as breathing, slowly inhaling and exhaling over tens of thousands of years. With each breath, the rains shift back and forth, deserts bloom and then fade. It is not a rapid gasp, but a long, patient rhythm. The Sahara is perhaps the clearest illustration of this breathing cycle. When the monsoons inhale northward, the desert becomes a savannah. When they exhale southward, the dunes reclaim the land. Satellite data and sediment cores from lakes confirm this. Layers rich in pollen from grasses, trees, and aquatic plants appear during humid phases, while dust dominates the record during arid ones. Even ocean sediments off the coast of West Africa show this rhythm, with bands of Saharan dust alternating with layers that reveal greener times. The Sahara, in a sense, leaves fingerprints in the ocean thousands of kilometers away, all because of the way Earth's orbit tilts and wobbles in space. This dance of cycles is not unique to Africa. It influences ice ages, monsoon systems in Asia, and rainfall patterns across the globe. But the Sahara amplifies the effect so vividly that it almost seems like a stage set for orbital mechanics. When conditions are right, it transforms from a barren wasteland into a lush garden. When the cycles shift again, the garden vanishes under dunes. The power of these cycles lies in how small changes can create big outcomes. A slight increase in summer sunlight can make the difference between a dry desert and a land crisscrossed with rivers. The vegetation that spreads during wetter times also feeds back into the system, darkening the land's surface and drawing in more rainfall. Conversely, as vegetation dies back, the land becomes brighter and reflects more sunlight, reducing rainfall further. These feedback loops make the Sahara especially sensitive to orbital nudges, tipping it between extremes. It is a humbling thought. A place so vast, so overwhelming in its scale, is ultimately shaped by tiny variations in the tilt of a spinning planet. To stand in the Sahara today and feel its stillness is to witness only one moment in a much longer rhythm, a single pause in Earth's deep breathing. The winds and sands tell one story, but the fossils, sediments, and orbital cycles reveal another, a story of change written into the very motion of our world around the sun. What makes this rhythm so fascinating is how it links the cosmic with the earthly. The angle of Earth's tilt, the timing of its wobble, the stretch of its orbit. These are astronomical details, but their consequences are rivers, hippos, and human settlements. It is a reminder that geography is never just about the ground beneath our feet. It is also about the sky above and the grand mechanics that guide our seasons. When we think of climate change today, we often imagine human influence as the dominant force. But long before our species began altering the atmosphere, the Sahara was already breathing with the pulse of orbital cycles. These slow shifts carved and erased entire landscapes, shaping where animals roamed and where humans could settle. The Green Sahara was not an anomaly, but part of a pattern, a regular heartbeat that has been repeating for millions of years. To see the Sahara as it is now, dry, immense and inhospitable, is to forget that it is also a place of memory, The desert holds within it the imprint of monsoon rains drawn northward by the tilt and wobble of Earth itself. It is as though the landscape is tuned to the planet's cosmic rhythm, changing face with every breath the Earth takes. One moment it is a desert, the next a savannah, and then a desert again, as patient and steady as the turning of the heavens. The Sahara's greening is therefore not a miracle but an inevitability, born of cycles written into the fabric of our orbit. And if the past is any guide, it will happen again, though not on the timescale of a human life. To the desert, 1,000 years is just another moment. To us, it is nearly forever. But whether we are here to see it or not, the Sahara will continue to follow the rhythm of the skies, breathing in, breathing out, reshaping itself in tune with the slow music of the Earth's orbit. When the rains came and the Sahara blossomed, it was not only plants and animals that flourished. People too found a home among its rivers, lakes, and rolling grasslands. The Green Sahara was not an empty wilderness waiting to be discovered. It was a living landscape, and human societies thrived there. For Neolithic herders and farmers, this was a land of opportunity, where cattle grazed on rich pastures, fish swam in deep lakes, and communities could carve out a life that would have been unthinkable in the arid desert we see today. The archaeological record shows that by around 10,000 years ago, humans were well established across what is now desert. They were not wanderers scraping by in a harsh environment. They were settled, resourceful, and creative, drawing on the bounty of a fertile land. Bones of domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats show that pastoralism, the keeping of animals for milk, meat, and hides, was widespread. Herds moved with the seasons, grazing on lush grasses, drinking from permanent lakes, and leaving behind dung and hoofprints in what is now barren sand. The fact that people invested so much in herding tells us just how reliable and abundant the resources must have been. Alongside herding, farming also began to take root. Evidence of cultivated grains, storage pits, and grinding stones points to early agriculture spreading through parts of the Sahara. This was not farming as we know it today, with neat fields of wheat stretching to the horizon, but it was enough to anchor communities. People grew millet and sorghum, and they gathered wild plants that grew in abundance. Fishing was common too. Nets, harpoons, and fish bones reveal a rich aquatic life, supported by lakes that teemed with tilapia and catfish. It is strange to imagine nets dripping with fish in the middle of what is now one of the driest places on Earth, but the evidence is unambiguous. One of the most vivid windows into this lost world is rock art. Across the Sahara, in places like the Tassili Najar in Algeria or the Enedi Plateau in Chad, cliffs and caves are decorated with paintings and carvings that capture scenes of daily life. Some show cattle with long curving horns, herded by figures carrying sticks or bows. Others depict wild animals, giraffes, antelopes, ostriches, drawn with remarkable detail and vitality. There are even images of people swimming, their limbs stretched out as though gliding through water, a clear sign that deep pools and rivers were once part of the landscape. These artworks are more than decoration, they are testimony. They tell us not just that people were here, but how they lived, what mattered to them, and how they saw their world. The animals were not abstract symbols. They were companions in survival, part of the shared environment. The paintings are often lively, almost celebratory, as if the artist wanted to preserve the sense of abundance they experienced. They are messages from a time when the Sahara was not a desert but a garden. Daily life in this fertile land must have been strikingly different from the challenges we associate with deserts today. Communities could gather in larger groups, supported by reliable food and water. Herding cattle required cooperation, and farming encouraged stability. People built homes from mud and stone, some of which still leave traces. Pottery fragments, tools, and burial sites reveal that these were not small fleeting encampments but long-lasting settlements. Adaptation was key. The rains could be generous, but they were not always predictable. Communities learned to read the land, to move when pastures dried, and to store food against leaner seasons. Wells and cisterns helped hold water, while flexible herding strategies ensured that cattle had grazing options. This blend of stability and mobility made it possible for societies to thrive for thousands of years. The animals they kept also shaped their lives. Cattle were more than just food, they were wealth, status, and companions. Rock art often exaggerates the horns of cattle, suggesting pride and reverence. Herders may have sung songs or told stories about their herds, just as pastoral communities do in Africa today. Goats and sheep offered resilience, able to graze in tougher conditions, while dogs likely helped manage flocks. In this way, the fertile Sahara was not just a place where people lived, it was a landscape woven into their culture, economy, and imagination. Archaeological finds also hint at connections beyond the Sahara. Shells from the coast, obsidian tools, and stylistic similarities in pottery suggest trade and communication, stretching across great distances. The fertile Sahara may have acted as a bridge, linking the Mediterranean to sub-Saharan Africa. Far from being an isolated desert, it was once a corridor of movement and exchange. Burial sites add another layer to the story. Graves from this period often contain grave goods, beads, ornaments, tools, and sometimes multiple individuals interred together. One remarkable site at Gobero in Niger revealed burials of people laid carefully with grave offerings, including children buried alongside adults. The care and ritual suggest communities with strong social ties and beliefs about life and death. To them, the Green Sahara was not only a home in life, but also a landscape tied to their ancestors. What stands out most is how well people adapted to their environment. They were not passive recipients of the Sahara's bounty, but active participants, shaping and being shaped by the landscape. They built their lives around cattle, crops, and water, using the fertile land to its fullest, while also leaving their mark in art, tools, and traditions. When we look at the Sahara today, it is easy to imagine that humans were always at its mercy, struggling against endless sand. The reality is that, in its greener times, humans thrived here just as much as in the Nile Valley or the savannas farther south. The people of the Green Sahara remind us that deserts are not fixed in meaning. They can be hostile or hospitable, barren or bountiful. For thousands of years, communities lived in a Sahara that was alive with opportunity, and they adapted with creativity and resilience. Their legacy survives not in living memory but in fossils, artifacts, and the art they left on stone walls. These are echoes of a world that has vanished beneath dunes but remains alive in the imagination. It is tempting to wonder what they would think of the Sahara today. A herder leading cattle to a vanished lake would find nothing but sand. A fisherman casting nets in a once abundant river would see only dry stones. A painter sketching a giraffe on a cave wall would be surrounded by silence. The contrast is stark, yet it does not erase their story. Instead, it makes their achievements all the more remarkable. They made a home in a landscape that has since become one of the harshest places on Earth. The story of humans among the grasslands of the Sahara is a reminder of both adaptability and impermanence. People lived here, thrived here, celebrated life here, and left their mark in bone, pottery, and art. The land that seems empty today once rang with voices, the lowing of cattle, and the laughter of children playing by lake shores. Beneath the dunes, their story is still written, waiting for us to uncover and remember it. In the imagination, a desert is the last place one expects to find water, and yet the Sahara has hidden stories of lakes so vast they rivaled inland seas. These were not small oases tucked between dunes, but enormous bodies of fresh water stretching far across the horizon. They were the jewels of the Green Sahara, shimmering expanses that drew animals, humans, and entire ecosystems to their shores. When we speak of them as lakes, it almost feels too modest a term. They were seas stranded in the desert, anchors of life in a land that today seems almost allergic to water. One of the most remarkable was the ancient version of Lake Chad. Today, the modern lake lies at the border of Chad, Niger, Nigeria and Cameroon, but it is only a ghost of its former self. At present, its surface area is a fraction of what it once was, shrinking dramatically over the last few decades due to droughts and water use. Yet in the humid phases of the Sahara, it was a giant. Scholars call it Mega Chad, and it truly earned the name. At its peak, it may have covered as much as 360,000 square kilometres, making it larger than the Caspian Sea is today. Imagine a sheet of water stretching across the Sahara, wide enough that standing at its edge, the opposite shore would have been lost to the haze of distance. For Neolithic herders and hunters, this was no desert. It was a landscape dominated by a freshwater ocean. The traces of Mega Chad are still visible. Ancient shorelines arc across the desert floor like the rings of a bathtub left behind after the water has drained. These curves are so immense that only satellites can fully capture their shape, looping across hundreds of kilometres of barren desert. Fossil fish, shells, and sediments further confirm the lake's watery history. In fact, dust blown from its former basin still influences the chemistry of soils and even fertilizes faraway rainforests across the Atlantic. What looks like a wasteland today once glittered with waves, supporting hippos, crocodiles, and humans who fished its abundant waters. Megachad was not alone. In the Fezzan Basin of Libya lay another extraordinary water body, Lake Megafezzan. Fed by rivers flowing down from the surrounding highlands, it spread across tens of thousands of square kilometres. Like Lake Chad, its memory remains written into the landscape. Layers of clay, deposits of freshwater organisms, and wide, flat plains mark where its waters once lay. Standing in the modern Fezzan, surrounded by bare sand and scorching winds, it is difficult to reconcile the scene with the idea of an inland sea. Yet for thousands of years, people lived by its shores, fishing, hunting, and herding, their daily lives dependent on its waters. There were other lakes too, now forgotten by all but scientists and the occasional herder who stumbles across their traces. Smaller paleo lakes dotted the Sahara, filling depressions and lowlands wherever rainfall gathered. In places like Egypt's oases or Algeria's basins, sediments tell the same story, repeated phases of rising water teeming with life. Some of these bodies of water were shallow, others deep, but all of them formed vital lifelines. To a giraffe or elephant, they were watering holes on a continental scale. To humans, they were the difference between settlement and migration. These seas in the desert were not just natural wonders, they were engines of survival. They sustained animals that required constant access to water, hippos, elephants, and cattle among them. Birds likely flocked in huge numbers to their wetlands, creating stopovers along ancient migration routes. Crocodiles slid silently beneath their surfaces, while fish thrived in their depths. For people, the lakes offered both security and abundance. Fish provided protein, reeds along the shores could be harvested for building and weaving, and the surrounding soil, enriched by seasonal floods, made fertile ground for crops. Villages and camps sprang up along the water's edge, their inhabitants leaving behind pottery, tools and art that still turn up in archaeological digs. The scale of these lakes is almost hard to grasp in the context of today's Sahara. To imagine paddling a canoe across Megachad or watching the sunrise over Lake Megafezzan is to picture a Sahara that feels almost like another planet. The shimmering expanse of water would have mirrored the sky, while lush vegetation grew thick along its edges. Herds of animals would have clustered at the margins, and human families would have gathered to fish, farm, and tell stories by the fire. These were landscapes of abundance, radically different from the sparse, fragile ecosystems that cling to life in the Sahara now. Lakes on such a scale also shaped the rhythms of human culture. They acted as magnets for settlement, encouraging people to cluster around their shores. The abundance of resources may have encouraged population growth and the spread of new technologies. Fishing gear, pottery for storing food, and the earliest experiments with farming all became more practical in a world where resources were plentiful. At the same time, these lakes likely served as hubs of movement, drawing groups into contact and encouraging exchange across regions. Water, after all, is the ultimate meeting point. The presence of these enormous lakes also helps explain why the Green Sahara could support so many large animals. Elephants and giraffes need vast amounts of food and water. Hippos need permanent rivers and lakes. Crocodiles can only thrive in stable aquatic environments. Without the steady supply of water from these inland seas, the Sahara could never have hosted such communities. The lakes were not just background scenery. They were the very foundation of life. Geologists studying the sediments of these vanished water bodies find layers rich in pollen, diatoms, and other microscopic clues. Each core drilled from an ancient lake bed is a time capsule, revealing the sequence of wet and dry phases over tens of thousands of years. They show that these lakes expanded and contracted many times, breathing in and out with the rhythms of Earth's orbital cycles. In wetter periods, they swelled into inland seas. In drier phases, they shrank or vanished, leaving behind cracked earth and dust. For people living at their shores, these changes must have been both opportunity and challenge. In times of plenty, communities could expand and thrive. In leaner years, they may have been forced to move, following rivers or seeking new lands. The memory of abundance was always shadowed by the risk of scarcity. Yet for thousands of years, the balance was generous enough that the Sahara remained a fertile homeland. Today, the modern remnants of these lakes serve as faint reminders. Lake Chad survives, though diminished, and continues to support millions of people. Its waters are a lifeline for farmers, herders, and fishers, just as they were thousands of years ago. But to look at it now and know it was once more than 10 times its current size is to realise how dramatically landscapes can change. The Sahara's lakes are gone, but their legacy lives on in the bones of hippos, the carvings of swimmers, and the ancient shorelines still etched into desert stone. The story of seas in the desert is one of the most striking reminders that geography is never fixed. The Sahara we know today hides a watery past, one that shaped ecosystems, animals, and human societies. These vanished lakes remind us that deserts are not eternal. They are landscapes in motion, capable of turning from parched sand to lush abundance and back again. The desert may look barren now, but beneath the dunes are memories of waves lapping against the shore, of children swimming, and of canoes gliding across waters as wide as seas. Across the Sahara, the sand hides more than bones and shorelines. It hides the memories of rivers. These are not the modest wadis that briefly run after a rare rainstorm, carving gullies in the ground before vanishing into dust. They were mighty waterways, flowing for hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometres, connecting regions, nourishing grasslands, and feeding vast lakes. Today, they are ghostly scars on the landscape, winding lines that can be traced from the air, reminders that the Sahara was once laced with veins of fresh water. Perhaps the most famous of these ghost rivers is the Wadi Hawa, often called the Yellow Nile. In its prime, it was no ephemeral trickle but a great river, a corridor of life that stretched across the eastern Sahara. Rising in what is now Chad, it flowed eastward for more than 1,000 kilometres, eventually joining the Nile in Sudan. Its channel would have been lined with grasses, shrubs and trees, supporting herds of animals and communities of people. Today, its bed is dry, a wide, sandy expanse that looks like a highway of stone and dust. From above, however, the pattern is unmistakable. This was once a thriving river, one of the great arteries of Africa's wetter past. The Wadi Hawa connected Central Africa's wetter regions to the Nile Valley, serving as a green bridge between ecosystems. Imagine elephants trudging along its banks, giraffes nibbling on trees, or pastoralists moving cattle between waterholes. Fish would have swum in its waters, crocodiles basked on its shores, and birds flocked along its route. For humans, it was both pathway and pantry, a reliable watercourse that offered food, water, and safe passage. The very idea that the Sahara was once host to such a river feels almost absurd when standing on its desiccated bed today, but the evidence is undeniable, and the Wadi Howa was not alone. Satellite imagery has revealed a vast web of former rivers crisscrossing the desert. These channels are often invisible at ground level, disguised by dunes or covered by millennia of dust. Yet from space, their winding patterns appear as faint threads, looping across the landscape. They show that the Sahara was once a land of watersheds, its basins feeding lakes and seas scattered across the desert floor. Some flowed into the Nile, others drained into Mega-Chad or into now-vanished inland seas like Lake Megafezzen. One particularly striking discovery was made in the 1990s, when radar imaging from the Space Shuttle uncovered a buried channel system running beneath the sand of Egypt's eastern Sahara. This ancient river, nicknamed the Radar River, stretched hundreds of kilometers and may have once fed into the Nile. The find was a revelation, showing that the Sahara's hidden waterways could still be mapped, even if they had been invisible for thousands of years. Each ghost river uncovered adds another layer to the story of a desert that was never truly barren. These rivers played a vital role in knitting ecosystems together. They were highways of life, carrying water, nutrients, and animals across the continent. In wetter times, the Sahara was less a barrier and more a corridor. Species could move freely along these waterways, linking the savannas of Central Africa to the Nile Valley, the Maghreb, and beyond. For humans, they provided routes for migration, trade, and cultural exchange. A herder moving cattle along the Wadi Howa was not just surviving. They were participating in a wider network of connections across Africa. The sediments left behind in these riverbeds tell their story with precision. Layers of sand and gravel deposited by flowing water alternate with clay and organic material, showing periods of strong currents and calmer floodplains. Fossilized remains of fish, mollusks, and even aquatic plants confirm that these were not occasional trickles, but substantial rivers. Pollen grains trapped in the sediments reveal the vegetation that grew along their banks, grasses, shrubs, and trees that would look at home in today's savannas. Taken together, these clues paint a vivid picture of landscapes utterly unlike the desert expanses that cover them now. What makes ghost rivers so fascinating is their double life. To a traveller on the ground, they are puzzling. A wide, flat valley might seem oddly out of place, or a line of greener vegetation may betray a hidden channel. In some places, farmers still tap underground aquifers left behind by these ancient rivers, irrigating fields with water that fell as rain thousands of years ago. To the eye of a satellite, however, the picture changes entirely. Suddenly, the Sahara looks less like a desert and more like a dry skeleton of a once thriving hydrological system, a place where rivers once branched and converged like veins under skin. The disappearance of these rivers was tied to the shifting monsoons and the end of the African humid period. As rainfall diminished, flow weakened, lakes shrank, tributaries dried, and channels filled with sand. What had once been ribbons of water became corridors of dust. The rivers did not vanish all at once, but dwindled over centuries, becoming unreliable, seasonal, and finally silent. People who once followed them were forced to adapt, retreating toward the Nile, the Sahel, or the Mediterranean coast. The rivers that had connected societies became deserts that divided them. Yet even in their absence, the ghost rivers of the Sahara still shape the present. Their buried channels hold fossil water that modern wells draw upon. Their sediments fertilize soils and shape the contours of the land, and their memory persists in oral traditions, rock art, and archaeological sites scattered along their paths. Some communities today still cluster around oases that are, in essence, remnants of these ancient systems, the last wet breath of rivers that once roared with life. It is a strange feeling to stand in a dry valley in the Sahara, knowing that crocodiles once lurked there and hippos splashed in pools deep enough to swallow a canoe. The contrast between past and present could not be sharper. A silence broken only by the wind once echoed with the calls of birds, the growls of predators, and the laughter of children playing in water. Every grain of sand underfoot was deposited by forces long gone, a reminder that even the stillest deserts are shaped by moving waters. The vanishing rivers are also a reminder of the Sahara's role in Africa's larger story. They were not simply features of the landscape, they were the connective tissue of the continent. By carrying water, they carried life, linking regions that today feel far apart. Without them, elephants could not have roamed so far north, crocodiles could not have survived, and human communities could not have thrived. The Sahara without rivers would never have been green. When you look at the Sahara today from space, with its seas of dunes and rocky plateaus, those faint lines still stand out, ghostly reminders of a wetter past. They show us that the desert has always been in flux, that what feels eternal is often temporary, and that rivers can disappear without erasing their memory. The Sahara's vanishing rivers may no longer flow, but their legacy remains, written in sediments, fossils, and the very shape of the land. They are whispers of water in a world of sand, proof that the desert has a memory, and that even silence can tell a story. The story of the Green Sahara is not only one of abundance and flourishing life, it is also a story of disappearance. For thousands of years, rivers flowed, lakes shimmered, and grasslands stretched across the horizon. Then, seemingly in a geological heartbeat, it was gone. The savannas withered, the rivers dried, and the desert we know today returned. What makes this transformation so striking is not only that it happened, but that it happened quickly, at least in the language of Earth's history. The question is, why did such a fertile land collapse into one of the harshest deserts on Earth? The key lies in the delicate balance between climate and vegetation. The Sahara's greening was fueled by changes in Earth's orbit that shifted the monsoon rains northward. More sunlight in the northern hemisphere summers drew moist air deep into the Sahara, watering grasslands and filling lakes, but this system depended on feedback loops that kept the landscape stable. Vegetation, once established, acted like a sponge, holding water in the soil, shading the ground, and releasing moisture back into the air. Lakes and wetlands added their own effect, creating local humidity and helping rainfall persist. In other words, the Green Sahara maintained itself, reinforcing the rains that sustained it. But balance is fragile. As Earth's orbit continued its slow wobble, the amount of summer sunlight in the northern hemisphere began to decline. This weakened the monsoon, and rainfall began to retreat southward. At first, the changes would have been subtle. Perhaps rains arrived later, or ended sooner. Perhaps lakes did not rise quite as high. But over time, the effect grew. With less water, vegetation began to die back. As grasslands turned to bare soil, the land reflected more sunlight back into the sky. With fewer plants transpiring moisture, the air grew drier. These shifts fed on themselves, amplifying the decline. Less rain meant fewer plants, and fewer plants meant even less rain. This feedback loop accelerated the transformation. A landscape that had supported hippos, giraffes, elephants, and human herders for millennia began to unravel. The retreat of vegetation was not uniform. Some areas dried faster than others, but the overall trend was clear. Once the rains dropped below a certain threshold, the entire system collapsed. Grasslands could no longer survive, and dunes marched in to claim the open ground. Lakes evaporated, leaving salt flats and dusty basins behind. Rivers dwindled to dry valleys. What had been a green corridor across Africa became a barrier once more. Sediment records capture this tipping point with remarkable clarity. In cores taken from lakes and from the Atlantic Ocean, downwind of the Sahara, the evidence is stark. For thousands of years, sediments contain pollen from trees and grasses, shells from freshwater organisms, and low levels of dust. Then, abruptly, the record shifts. Pollen disappears, replaced by layers dominated by dust blown from the desert. Within just a few centuries, in some places perhaps even less, the Sahara flipped from green to barren. For a change of this scale, in Earth's terms, that is lightning fast. For the people who lived there, the transformation must have been dramatic. Communities that had once thrived along riverbanks and lake shores found their world shrinking. Herds struggled as pastures dried up, fish stocks dwindled as lakes receded, and settlements were abandoned as water vanished. Rock art from the later phases of the Green Sahara sometimes shows cattle being driven south, as if even the art recorded the migration. People adapted as best they could, moving toward the Nile Valley, the Sahel, or the Mediterranean. In this way, the collapse of the Green Sahara may have helped seed other cultures, forcing migration that carried knowledge and traditions with it. The desert's loss became a catalyst for human dispersal. The rapidity of this change has long fascinated scientists. How could such a large, fertile region flip so suddenly? The answer lies in the interaction of slow orbital shifts with fast local feedbacks. Earth's wobble reduced the rains gradually, but once vegetation began to retreat, the system spiraled into collapse. Think of it as a seesaw balanced on a knife edge. For thousands of years it stayed tilted toward green, but a small push, a slight weakening of rainfall, was enough to tip it the other way. Once tipped, it was nearly impossible to reverse. This sensitivity makes the Sahara one of the best examples of a climate tipping point. These are thresholds in the Earth system where a small change triggers a big shift, often irreversible on human timescales. Ice sheets melting, rainforests turning to savannah, ocean currents shutting down. These are all potential tipping points. The Sahara shows that landscapes can indeed cross such thresholds, transforming quickly and dramatically. What feels stable to us may in fact be poised for sudden change. The human imagination often assumes that deserts are eternal, but the Sahara's story proves otherwise. The very same dunes we see today once looked over meadows and forests. The very valleys that now lie dry once carried rivers to the Nile. The desert has flipped states many times in its history, green to dry and back again, each time following the rhythm of Earth's orbit. The difference now is that we live in a world where human activity interacts with these natural cycles, adding new layers of complexity to an already fragile system. The collapse of the Green Sahara also underscores how interconnected the planet is. When vegetation disappeared and dust replaced it, that dust did not stay in Africa. Winds carried it across the Atlantic, fertilizing the Amazon rainforest with nutrients. In a sense, the Sahara's loss became South America's gain. The disappearance of lakes and rivers altered not only local life but global systems of climate and ecology. What happened in the Sahara mattered, and still matters, far beyond its borders. To imagine this transformation is to imagine loss on a continental scale. Lakes the size of countries shrinking to nothing, rivers that once roared reduced to silence, and grasslands replaced by shifting seas of sand. Hippos that once wallowed in muddy pools stranded on cracked earth. Human communities forced to leave their homes carrying only memories of abundance, and all of it unfolding not over tens of thousands of years but within a handful of centuries. The Green Sahara ended not because of a single catastrophe, but because of the gradual push of orbital mechanics amplified by the desert's own feedbacks. A slow nudge from space became a rapid collapse on the ground. The Earth shifted its posture ever so slightly, and an entire ecosystem gave way. What is left is a desert that feels permanent, but is, in reality, only the latest phase in a long cycle. The Sahara as we know it is a product of that tipping point, the aftermath of a once thriving landscape collapsing into sand. Beneath its dunes lie the memories of grasslands, rivers and lakes, waiting silently until the cycles of the planet turn again. It is a reminder that even the mightiest landscapes can be fragile, and that the line between abundance and barrenness can be thinner than we imagine. When the rains retreated and the grasslands faltered, it was sand that took their place. At first, the change might have seemed gradual, patches of bare earth spreading where once there had been green, riverbanks collapsing into dust, lakes shrinking until their shorelines cracked in the sun. But as the Sahara tipped into dryness, the desert began its slow but unstoppable conquest. The winds that had once carried moisture now carried grains of quartz, sculpting the land into the vast sand seas that dominate the Sahara today. Sand has an odd kind of patience. A single grain is almost nothing, but countless billions moved by wind can rework entire landscapes. Each gust lifts particles into the air, tumbling them forward in small hops, a process scientists call saltation. Grain by grain, hill by hill, dunes grow and migrate, inching across the desert like an enormous tide. Over centuries, this tide swallowed grasslands, covered rivers, and buried evidence of the fertile world that came before. The Sahara's dunes are not uniform. They are as diverse as snowflakes. Some rise in long parallel ridges stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Others form star shapes, with arms radiating in every direction like frozen explosions of sand. Some are low and crescent-shaped, advancing slowly like waves across a shore. Star dunes, among the largest, can soar over 300 meters tall, making them as high as skyscrapers. From the air, these patterns look almost alive, as though the desert itself were shifting in slow motion, arranging its own geometry under the guiding hand of the wind. Winds have always been the desert's sculptors. In the Sahara, the prevailing trade winds sweep from the northeast, carrying grains across vast distances. Seasonal monsoon winds once brought moisture, but now often drive sandstorms, lifting entire walls of dust into the sky. These storms can last hours or days, blotting out the sun and turning day to twilight. When the winds subside, the sand settles again, sometimes meters away, sometimes kilometers, always changing the desert's face. Over time, the accumulations build into dunes that move like glaciers, slow but relentless, reshaping everything in their path. The imagery of sand-swallowing grasslands is not mere metaphor. Sediment studies show that as vegetation retreated, dunes advanced, covering fertile soil under a shifting blanket of quartz grains. Trees that once shaded giraffes and cattle were uprooted and buried. Lakes that had sparkled in the sun filled with sand, their basins becoming depressions lined with dunes. Villages, campsites, and ancient tools were entombed, preserved in silence until archaeologists uncover them thousands of years later. In some places, the outlines of ancient shorelines are now smothered by dunes so massive that their original shape is barely discernible. The dunes also create illusions. From ground level they look eternal, as though they have always been there. Yet they are dynamic, restless, and ever-moving. Some march only a few meters each year, while others can advance dozens of meters. Entire communities in the Sahel, the southern fringe of the Sahara, live with the slow threat of encroaching sand, dunes swallowing fields, roads, and even buildings. It is the same process that buried the Sahara's green past, still at work in the present. Despite their destructiveness, dunes are also strangely beautiful. Their curves catch the light in subtle ways, creating bands of gold at sunrise and crimson at sunset. The crests ripple with delicate patterns like waves on a beach frozen in time. At night, when the moon is bright, the dunes glow softly, their shadows stretching across the desert like vast brushstrokes. For ancient people forced to abandon their homes, the dunes may have been symbols of loss. For travellers and poets since, they have become symbols of eternity, silence, and grandeur. Geologically, the Sahara's sand is surprisingly young. Much of it was deposited within the last several million years, carried down from mountains by rivers, and then reworked by wind. During wetter periods, vegetation pinned the sand in place, but once the climate tipped and grasses died away, the dunes were free to move again. The Sahara we see today, seas of sand stretching across Algeria, Libya, Niger, Mali, and beyond, is the legacy of this release. The dunes' advance was not uniform. Some regions of the Sahara, especially rocky plateaus and gravel plains, resisted the invasion of sand. These regs, or stony deserts, are austere but stable, less easily shifted by wind. Yet between them lie vast ergs, the sand seas that define the desert in the popular imagination. The Grand Erg Oriental and the Grand Erg Occidental in Algeria, the Ubari Sand Sea in Libya, and the Tenere Desert in Niger are only a few examples. Each is a landscape of dunes upon dunes, extending farther than the eye can see. The conquest of sand also altered the desert's climate. As vegetation disappeared and reflective sand spread, the Sahara became hotter and drier. The light-coloured dunes bounced more sunlight back into the sky, reducing surface temperatures but also suppressing convection that might have drawn in clouds. With less moisture recycled from plants, rainfall decreased further. The desert was no longer just a product of dryness. It was an enforcer of it. The dunes themselves helped lock the Sahara into aridity, stabilizing its new identity as the world's greatest hot desert. Animals and people were forced to retreat. Hippos and crocodiles vanished from shrinking rivers. Elephants and giraffes migrated southward in search of greener pastures. Human communities followed, abandoning settlements swallowed by advancing sand. Yet traces remain. Archaeologists have uncovered hearths, stone tools and pottery buried beneath dunes, preserved in astonishing condition. Each discovery is a reminder that beneath the surface of the modern Sahara lies a palimpsest of human and natural history, overwritten by the script of sand. To imagine the dunes' conquest is to picture an army without generals, each grain a soldier moving under orders from the wind. Slowly, silently, they advanced, covering lakes, rivers, and savannas. The march was steady, unhurried, but unstoppable. The result is the Sahara as we know it, a landscape that seems eternal, even though it is the outcome of relatively recent change. The dunes whisper their story with every shift and ripple, but their language is patience, measured in centuries rather than days. What began as grasslands and lakes ended as seas of sand. The dunes consume the fertile Sahara not in a rush, but in a long procession, a quiet conquest that left behind beauty, desolation, and memory in equal measure. They are still on the move today, restless sculptures that remind us that even in silence, the desert is never still. The sand's slow conquest continues, reshaping the world grain by grain. The Sahara, vast and silent, often seems like a place without memory. Wind scours the dunes, shifting them from year to year, and the horizon looks as if it has erased every trace of those who came before. Yet beneath the sand and on its rocky plateaus, the desert holds stories in stone and bone. These are not myths or guesses, but tangible fragments, tools left behind, shards of pottery, skeletons buried with care, and carvings etched into rock faces. Together they speak of people who thrived in a Sahara that was once green, who raised families, built communities, and lived full lives in landscapes that today look utterly barren. Archaeologists have uncovered stone tools scattered across the desert floor, evidence that humans walked and worked here for tens of thousands of years. Some are simple flakes used to cut plants or butcher animals. Others are finely crafted arrowheads, spear tips, and grinding stones. To stumble upon one in the sand is to hold in your hand the echo of a meal prepared or a hunt carried out thousands of years ago. These tools are reminders that survival here was not improvisation. It was a practiced way of life, honed across generations in an environment that once offered abundance. Pottery tells a more settled story. Fragments of clay vessels have been found across the Sahara, many decorated with patterns pressed into wet clay before firing. Some are simple, meant for storage or carrying water. Others are ornate, suggesting that beauty was valued alongside utility. The oldest pottery in Africa, dating back more than 9,000 years, comes from Saharan sites. Its presence indicates a society stable enough to produce and carry fragile containers rather than living solely as nomads. These shards, though broken, speak of households, of meals shared, of families living with a sense of permanence. Perhaps the most poignant discoveries are skeletons. Burial sites dot the Sahara, some isolated, others forming ancient cemeteries. One of the most famous was found at Gobero in Niger, a site uncovered in the early 2000s. Here, archaeologists discovered dozens of graves dating back to the Green Sahara. Some belonged to hunter-gatherers who lived more than 9,000 years ago, while others belonged to pastoralists who arrived a few thousand years later. One grave held a woman and 2 children, their bodies carefully arranged and sprinkled with flowers, a tender gesture of farewell that survived across millennia. Another held individuals buried with jewellery, beads and tools, showing that even in death people carried the symbols of their lives. The skeletons also tell a biological story. Some show the tall, robust frames of hunter-gatherers who lived off the land's bounty, fishing and foraging. Later remains reveal shorter, stockier builds more typical of pastoral communities who relied on herding. Bones marked by wear, disease or injury reveal the realities of daily life. Arthritis from constant movement, tooth decay from diets that included more grain, healed fractures from accidents or conflicts. These details, small and personal, remind us that these were not faceless figures, but individuals with joys and hardships much like our own. Rock art adds still more depth. In caves and on cliffs across Algeria, Chad, Niger and Libya, artists painted and carved scenes of their world. Some show animals long gone from the desert, hippos, elephants, even swimming humans, confirming what fossils already suggest. Others depict cattle with exaggerated horns, herders driving their flocks, or families dancing and feasting. The art is lively and expressive, not crude sketches, but vibrant images of daily life. They offer not only a record of what people saw, but also of what they valued. Animals appear with reverence, herds with pride, and social gatherings with joy. These are the Saharan equivalent of family albums, etched not in paper, but in stone. Taken together, the tools, pottery, skeletons and art tell a story of adaptation and community. The people of the Green Sahara were not merely surviving in a harsh land, they were flourishing in one that provided for them. They fished in lakes, herded cattle on grasslands, cultivated crops in fertile soils, and built cultures rich enough to express themselves in art and ritual. Their lives were shaped by the rhythm of the monsoon, the availability of water, and the animals around them, but they were not passive inhabitants. They were active participants in shaping their world, leaving behind traces of ingenuity and creativity. There is a poignancy in knowing that these vibrant societies vanished with the rains. As the climate shifted and the desert returned, communities were forced to abandon their homes. Pottery was left behind, tools buried under sand, graves covered by dunes. The Green Sahara faded into memory, carried southward by those who migrated to more fertile lands. Some moved into the Nile Valley, where their knowledge of herding and farming may have contributed to the growth of ancient Egyptian civilization. Others drifted toward the Sahel or deeper into sub-Saharan Africa. The Sahara became less a home and more a wall, dividing regions that had once been connected. Yet the desert never fully erased their presence. Every discovery, a stone blade, a decorated pot, a burial site, is a reminder of lives lived fully in a world that no longer exists. It is humbling to hold a shard of pottery and realize that the hands that shaped it belonged to someone who laughed, worried, and loved in a land now ruled by silence. It is humbling to gaze at rock art and imagine the artist crouched with pigment in hand, recording cattle or elephants that we can scarcely imagine walking across the dunes. These fragments bridge thousands of years, linking our present to their past in ways that are both fragile and enduring. The vanished cultures of the Sahara invite reflection on the impermanence of landscapes and societies. Civilizations rise in fertile lands, flourish for a time, and then face the challenge of change. In the Sahara, that change came not from invasion or collapse, but from the slow shift of Earth's orbit and the feedback loops of climate. The desert is a reminder that even the most thriving societies can be undone by forces beyond their control, and that adaptation, migration, reinvention, resilience is as much a part of humanity as creation and growth. There is also beauty in the endurance of memory. Though the Green Sahara disappeared thousands of years ago, its story lives on in stone and bone. Archaeologists continue to uncover new sites, piecing together a picture that grows richer with every discovery. Each find adds detail to the mosaic of a world that once was, reminding us that deserts are not places without history, but landscapes with deep, hidden archives. When you walk across the Sahara today and feel its silence, remember that beneath your feet lies evidence of a world where people swam, herded, painted, and buried their loved ones with care. The desert may appear empty, but it is filled with echoes. Every shard of pottery, every tool chipped from stone, every skeleton laid to rest is a voice calling across millennia, telling us that the Sahara was once alive with culture and community. The poignancy of their vanished world makes the silence of the desert all the more profound. It is not the silence of nothingness, but the silence of memory, waiting for us to listen. The Sahara is the world's largest hot desert, but it is far from the only place where sand, rock, and heat reign. Around the globe, deserts take many forms, each with their own rhythms, surprises, and secrets. And like the Sahara, they are not always what they seem. To think of deserts as lifeless wastelands is to miss their subtle vitality. They are places that can bloom, shift, and surprise, landscapes that prove even the harshest environments are alive in their own way. Consider the Atacama Desert in Chile, often called the driest place on Earth. Parts of it have gone without measurable rainfall for centuries, and its hyper-arid core is so dry that NASA has used it to test instruments for missions to Mars. On the surface, it seems utterly inhospitable, with salt flats, rocky plains, and skies so clear they attract astronomers from all over the world. Yet even here, life finds a way. Tiny microbes thrive in salty soils, flamingos gather in high-altitude lagoons, and hardy plants eke out survival where fog drifts in from the Pacific. And once in a while, something extraordinary happens. The desert blooms. After rare rainfall events, usually linked to El Niño conditions, the Atacama's barren ground bursts into colour. Wildflowers spread across the plains in carpets of purple, yellow, and white, transforming a landscape that had looked dead into a sea of blossoms. For a few short weeks, the desert becomes a garden, reminding anyone who sees it that lifelessness is only an illusion. In Arabia, deserts tell another kind of story. The Arabian Desert sprawls across Saudi Arabia, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and beyond, covering an area almost as large as the Sahara's sand seas. Here, too, sand dunes march across the horizon, some of them the tallest in the world, towering over 300 metres. But Arabia's deserts are not just sand. They are punctuated by oases where underground aquifers bubble to the surface, creating pockets of life that have sustained human settlements for millennia. Ancient trade routes crisscrossed these arid lands, linking cultures through caravans of camels carrying frankincense, spices, and textiles. Even in the harshest conditions, people adapted, learning to draw water from wells, harvest dates from palm groves, and navigate by stars through the vast emptiness. And like the Sahara, Arabia's deserts remember wetter times. Fossils and sediments tell us that rivers once flowed here too, feeding grasslands where now there is only sand. Rock art carved into cliffs depicts cattle, hunters, and animals that would never survive in Arabia today. These traces are strikingly similar to those of the Green Sahara, suggesting that desert greening and drying is not unique to one region, but part of a wider global rhythm. Arabia's empty expanses, in other words, are only the latest chapter in a story of cycles. If we shift to southern Africa, the Kalahari Desert offers yet another perspective. Unlike the Atacama or Arabia, the Kalahari is not always a true desert in the strict sense. It receives more rainfall than most deserts, and much of it is covered with grasses, shrubs, and scattered trees. Rather than being a wasteland, it is more like a semi-arid savanna. Elephants, lions, and giraffes roam here, along with springboks, wildebeests, and the famous meerkats that pop up like sentinels from sandy burrows. The Kalahari shows that deserts are not always places of absence. They can be brimming with wildlife, just adapted to the extremes of dry seasons and unpredictable rains. For the San people, who have lived here for tens of thousands of years, the Kalahari is not a barren wilderness, but a homeland, rich with resources if you know where to look. What unites these deserts, despite their differences, is their dynamism. They are not static places locked in dryness forever. The Atacama blooms after rain, Arabia carries memory of greener times, and the Kalahari shifts between grassland and arid scrub depending on the season. Even the Sahara, seemingly eternal, has cycled between savanna and sand many times. Deserts, in this sense, are living, shifting spaces. They change with climate, with rainfall, and with the feedback loops of vegetation and soil. To label them barren is to miss the point. They are landscapes in motion, always balancing on the edge between scarcity and abundance. The resilience of life in these places is also remarkable. In the Atacama, seeds can lie dormant for years, waiting for the rare rain that will awaken them. In Arabia, date palms thrive in oases where careful irrigation makes the most of underground water. In the Kalahari, animals adapt to the rhythm of wet and dry seasons, timing migrations and breeding to make use of every drop. Even microbes, invisible to the naked eye, cling to survival in salt pans and dunes, demonstrating that life is far more tenacious than it appears. Humans, too, have found ways to live in deserts across the world. From the caravan traders of Arabia to the herders of the Kalahari and the miners of the Atacama, people have treated deserts not as empty spaces but as challenges to be embraced. For some, deserts are homelands rich in culture and tradition. For others, they are highways of trade or places of spiritual reflection. Monks have sought solitude in desert caves, pilgrims have crossed them to reach holy sites, and poets have celebrated their silence. Far from being dead zones, deserts are woven into the fabric of human history and imagination. Deserts that bloom elsewhere remind us of something essential. Dryness is not destiny. Climate shifts, rainfall, and time can all transform them. Even the drier soil can explode with flowers given the chance. The Sahara story of greening and drying is echoed in deserts across the globe. They too have had their fertile periods and their barren ones, their moments of abundance and their ages of scarcity. To see deserts as living, shifting spaces is to understand them not as failures of nature, but as expressions of its variety. They show us resilience, adaptation, and the power of cycles. One century a desert may be a wasteland. The next it may bloom into a savanna. Life bides its time, waiting patiently for the rains to return. The Atacama's flowers, the Kalahari's wildlife, and Arabia's memories of greener days all remind us that deserts are not permanent states, but moments within a greater story. So when we think of deserts, it is worth holding two images together. One is of silence, heat, and sand stretching endlessly. The other is of sudden transformation, blossoms bursting after rain, herds grazing on seasonal grass, or rivers flowing where now there are only dry valleys. Both are true. Both are part of what it means to be a desert. They are landscapes that carry memory, that reveal themselves slowly, and that continue to surprise. In their shifting, they remind us that even the harshest places are never truly lifeless. They are waiting, as they always have, for the right moment to bloom. When people think of the Sahara, they imagine dunes stretching endlessly, a landscape sealed within itself. yet the desert is anything but isolated. Every year, winds lift billions of tons of dust from its surface and carry it thousands of kilometers across the globe. What begins as a swirl of sand in Chad or Mali may end as a fine film settling on trees in South America or drifting down into the Atlantic Ocean. In this way, the Sahara is not only a desert, it is also a global supplier, scattering nutrients that sustain ecosystems oceans away. The journey of Saharan dust is astonishing in both scale and distance. Satellite images show plumes of pale brown streaming westward over the Atlantic, sometimes stretching for thousands of kilometers. These clouds can be so vast they are visible from space as ribbons arching from Africa toward the Caribbean. Planes flying through them record fine particles suspended high in the atmosphere, dust so light it can remain airborne for days or even weeks. What seems lifeless and inert on the desert floor becomes, in motion, a bridge between continents. One of the most remarkable destinations for this airborne cargo is the Amazon rainforest. At first glance, nothing could be more different from the Sahara than the lush, water-soaked expanse of the Amazon basin. And yet the two are intimately linked. The soils of the Amazon are surprisingly poor in nutrients, washed out by constant rains that leach minerals away. Without replenishment, the forest would struggle to sustain itself. Enter the Sahara. The dust blown across the ocean is rich in phosphorus, a key nutrient for plants. Year after year, it drifts down like invisible fertilizer, feeding the Amazon and helping maintain one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. Scientists estimate that tens of millions of tons of Saharan dust fall on the Amazon each year, much of it originating in an ancient dry lake bed in Chad called the Bodele Depression. This basin, once a vast inland sea, is now one of the world's most significant dust factories. The winds funnel through mountain gaps, scooping up fine sediments packed with nutrients from long-dead organisms. Each grain carries the memory of ancient lakes, and together they form a delivery system that keeps the rainforest alive. Without this transatlantic exchange, the Amazon as we know it might not exist. But the influence of Saharan dust does not stop in South America. Some of it rains down over the Caribbean, enriching soils and influencing coral reef health. Other plumes settle into the Atlantic Ocean itself, providing nutrients for plankton, the tiny organisms that form the base of the marine food chain. In this way, the Sahara contributes not just to forests, but to oceans, feeding life at both the grand and microscopic scale. The dust also shapes climate directly. When giant plumes spread across the Atlantic, they scatter and absorb sunlight, cooling the ocean's surface below. This cooling can suppress the formation of hurricanes, meaning that storms in the Caribbean and along the American coastlines may be weaker or less frequent in dusty years. The desert, in other words, reaches across the ocean to influence weather systems on the other side of the planet. What begins as dry gusts over dunes can determine whether or not a city thousands of kilometers away faces a devastating storm. There is a poetic symmetry in this exchange. The Sahara, which once held great lakes and rivers, now sends their mineral remains as dust to nourish lands across the ocean. Life that thrived in the green Sahara left behind sediments, which the winds now carry to sustain life elsewhere. The desert's apparent emptiness is deceptive. It is a reservoir of nutrients, constantly redistributing its wealth to distant ecosystems. This connection also reminds us that Earth's systems are inseparably linked. A single landscape can affect others half a world away. A rainforest, often seen as self-contained and endlessly fertile, depends in part on the death of an ancient African lake. A hurricane's strength may hinge on how much dust blows across the Atlantic in summer. Even the colour of sunsets in Europe can be traced back to Saharan dust, high in the atmosphere, scattering light into brilliant reds and oranges. The desert's reach is global. Of course, the dust does not bring only benefits. It can degrade air quality in the Caribbean, Central America, and even the southern United States, aggravating respiratory conditions. It can dim skies and reduce visibility for days. But even these inconveniences highlight just how far the desert's influence travels. Few natural forces are so visible across so many regions. Studying this dust has become a science in its own right. Satellites track its plumes, measuring their size and composition. Ground stations collect samples to analyse their nutrient content. Oceanographers trace its effect on plankton blooms, while climatologists examine its role in shaping storm systems. What emerges from this research is a picture of the Sahara, not as an isolated wasteland, but as one of the planet's great movers of matter and energy. In a sense, the Sahara writes letters in dust, scattering them across the world for anyone with the right instruments to read. Each plume tells of ancient lakes now vanished, of sediments formed in greener times, of winds that have blown across Africa for millennia. The story it writes is both ancient and ongoing, linking continents, ecosystems and climates. It is humbling to think that the greenness of the Amazon depends in part on the dryness of the Sahara. Two of the world's most iconic landscapes, one lush, one barren, are bound together by particles smaller than a grain of sand. This unlikely partnership reveals the deep interdependence of Earth's systems, where deserts and rainforests, oceans and winds all shape each other's fate. So the next time you see a photograph of a Saharan sandstorm billowing into the sky, imagine where that dust might be headed. Some of it could be feeding plankton in the Atlantic, some fertilizing trees in Brazil, and some falling softly on rooftops in the Caribbean. The desert's silence is deceptive, for in truth it is speaking constantly, sending whispers across the sea in the language of dust. The Sahara is not merely a place of absence, it is also a source, a giver, a participant in global cycles of life. Its dust is a reminder that even the driest, harshest landscapes are woven into the fabric of the planet, sustaining faraway forests, shaping weather, and painting sunsets. The desert may seem empty when you stand in it, but in truth it is reaching across the world, leaving lessons written in dust. The Sahara seems eternal in its silence, but history tells us it is anything but fixed. It has been green before, and the question naturally arises, could it be green again? The answer lies partly in the steady cycles of Earth's orbit, partly in the uncertain trajectory of human-driven climate change, and partly in the bold ideas of those who imagine reshaping deserts through technology and ambition. Climate models suggest that, left to its own devices, the Sahara will indeed cycle back into a greener state. The same Milankovitch cycles that once pulled the African monsoon northward will continue, wobbling and tilting Earth over tens of thousands of years. According to these patterns, the Sahara should experience another humid phase in perhaps 10 to 15,000 years, when summer sunlight once again strengthens across the northern hemisphere and draws the rains back into the desert. From the perspective of geological time, this is almost certain. From the perspective of a human lifetime, it feels like forever. Our species may have changed beyond recognition by then, yet the desert will still be listening to the rhythms of orbit and tilt. But what about sooner? Could modern climate change accelerate or delay the Sahara's greening? Here, the picture becomes murkier. Some models suggest that human activity, by pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, may alter the timing or intensity of monsoon systems. A warmer world holds more moisture, and in theory this could increase rainfall in some parts of North Africa. Satellite records over the last few decades already show small but notable greening in the Sahel, the semi-arid belt south of the Sahara, where rainfall has increased slightly after a long period of drought. Shrubs, grasses and trees are slowly returning to places that had been barren for decades. It is not a full revival of the Green Sahara, but it is a hint that the desert's edge is never as stable as it seems. Other models caution against optimism. Climate change is a messy business, altering wind patterns, shifting storm tracks, and disrupting feedback loops in ways that are hard to predict. While some areas may get wetter, others may become even drier. The Sahara's future under human influence is uncertain, suspended between possibilities of renewal and further desiccation. Beyond natural cycles and climate change, there is also the question of deliberate human intervention. Could we, in theory, bring the Sahara back to life? The idea of greening deserts is not new. Visionaries have proposed everything from planting vast forests to flooding low-lying basins with seawater to harness evaporation and rainfall. These ideas fall under the broad heading of geoengineering, deliberate attempts to reshape the environment on a massive scale. One of the most ambitious proposals is the Sahara Forest Project, which combines solar power, desalination, and agriculture. The concept is to use solar energy to produce fresh water from seawater, irrigating crops and creating greenhouses in the desert. Pilot projects in places like Qatar and Jordan have shown promising results on a small scale. Expanding this across the Sahara would be monumental, but in principle it could turn parts of the desert into productive farmland. The vision is one of transformation, vast stretches of sand covered in solar panels, greenhouses blooming where dunes once ruled, and food security bolstered by desert innovation. Other ideas are even bolder. Some scientists have suggested covering parts of the Sahara with reflective surfaces or solar farms, changing the balance of heat and moisture and potentially altering rainfall patterns. One study argued that large-scale solar and wind installations could increase rainfall locally, creating feedback loops that sustain vegetation. In this scenario, clean energy projects would not only power the world, but also coax the desert into a greener state. Of course, such interventions come with risks. Climate systems are complex, and tinkering with one region could have unintended consequences for another. A greener Sahara achieved through technology might alter monsoon patterns elsewhere, potentially harming other ecosystems. There are also more grounded grassroots projects such as the Great Green Wall of Africa. This initiative aims to plant a band of trees and vegetation across the Sahel, stretching from Senegal to Djibouti. Though progress has been uneven, the project embodies the hope of reversing desertification and restoring fertile land. While it will not bring back hippos and crocodiles to the Sahara itself, it could stabilize soils, improve agriculture, and create a living barrier against the desert's advance. It is a reminder that greening does not always mean returning to ancient ecosystems. Sometimes it means adapting deserts into productive spaces for people today. Speculation about the Sahara's future often blends science with imagination. Some envision vast aquaculture projects, filling depressions like the Qattara Depression in Egypt with seawater to create artificial lakes. Others dream of genetically engineered plants designed to thrive in arid climates, carpeting the desert with greenery. And still others wonder whether climate change itself, however destructive in many ways, might inadvertently bring the rains back to North Africa. The truth is, no one knows for sure. The Sahara is vast, and its climate is tied to global systems that defy simple prediction. What is certain is that the desert is not static. It has flipped between green and dry many times, and it will do so again. Whether humans play a role in hastening that change, or whether we merely watch from the sidelines, is the open question. The Sahara's future may be shaped by orbital cycles, by carbon emissions, by bold projects, or by a combination of all three. There is something both sobering and comforting in this. Sobering, because it reminds us how fragile ecosystems can be, how quickly abundance can vanish when feedback loops unravel. Comforting, because it shows that even the most forbidding landscapes are not permanent prisons. Deserts are not destiny. They are states of balance, waiting to be tipped one way or another. To picture the Sahara green again is to picture elephants grazing in meadows, hippos wallowing in lakes, and humans building communities on fertile plains. Whether that vision is thousands of years away, or within the reach of our own ingenuity remains uncertain, but the possibility lingers, like a mirage on the horizon. The desert today feels timeless, but it is already shifting. Dust still flies across oceans, shrubs creep along its southern edge, and the planet's orbit continues its slow wobble. Will the Sahara be green again? almost certainly, though perhaps not for us or even for our distant descendants. Still, the question is more than scientific. It is also philosophical. It asks us to imagine change on scales beyond our lifetimes, to see deserts not as dead ends but as chapters in a longer story. Whether through cosmic cycles, human innovation, or a blend of both, the Sahara will not remain as it is forever. It has been green before, it will be green again. The only question is when, and under whose watchful eyes the first rains will fall on the dunes once more. The Sahara's story is a reminder that the Earth is not as steady as it seems. Beneath the apparent stability of seasons and landscapes lies a delicate clockwork of orbital mechanics and feedback loops, a system that can tilt climates from abundance to scarcity with what look like the smallest nudges. To us, deserts and forests, ice caps and oceans feel immense, too vast to change within any human frame of reference. Yet the Sahara proves that landscapes of continental scale can transform dramatically in the space of only a few centuries. That is the fragility of climate rhythms. Small adjustments in the gears of the planet can bring about sweeping revolutions on the ground. The foundation of these rhythms lies in the way Earth moves around the Sun. We orbit once a year, but the path is not fixed. It stretches and tightens, it wobbles, and it tilts. These motions, known as Milankovitch cycles, alter how much sunlight falls on different parts of the planet at different times of year. A fraction more sunlight in northern summers might seem trivial, but in reality it is enough to shift the African monsoon northward, to fill lakes across the Sahara, to turn dunes into meadows. Likewise, a fraction less sunlight can push the rain south, kill the grasses, and send the desert marching back. The cycles themselves are measured in tens of thousands of years. Eccentricity, the changing shape of Earth's orbit, runs on a 100,000-year beat. Obliquity, the tilt of Earth's axis, follows a 41,000-year rhythm, and precession, the slow wobble of Earth's spin, completes a circuit every 26,000 years. On paper, these sound abstract and distant, but the Sahara is the living demonstration of their power. The Green Sahara was born when these cycles lined up in favour of stronger northern summers. It died when the alignment shifted ever so slightly, weakening the monsoon. Orbital nudges, tiny on the cosmic scale, translated into transformations visible from space. Yet the story is not just about orbital forcing. Feedback systems magnify the effects. Vegetation, once established, darkens the land, absorbing heat and pulling in more moisture. Grasses hold soils together, allowing roots to retain water and recycle it into the atmosphere. Lakes and wetlands add humidity, feeding storms. In this way, the greening of the Sahara reinforced itself, but the feedback worked both ways. When the rains faltered, vegetation thinned, soils reflected more sunlight, and the air grew drier. What began as a modest decline spiraled into collapse. The Sahara flipped from green to barren not because of a single catastrophic event, but because its feedback loops amplified small changes until the system tipped. This sensitivity is what makes climate rhythms fragile. We're used to thinking of deserts as eternal, glaciers as immovable, rainforests as inexhaustible. But each exists in balance with forces that can tip them the other way. The Sahara was once a corridor of rivers and grasslands. The Amazon depends on dust blown from that very desert. The Greenland ice sheet melts or grows with small shifts in temperature. These systems are not locked in place but perched on thresholds, ready to switch states when nudged. For humans living through these shifts, the consequences were enormous. Communities that had fished in Great Lakes or herded cattle on savannas were forced to migrate as water disappeared. The Nile Valley swelled with new arrivals, and the Sahel became a frontier of adaptation. These movements shaped the trajectory of entire civilizations, showing how fragile climate rhythms ripple outward into culture, economy, and history. What looks like a shift in rainfall on a graph is, on the ground, families leaving their homes, traditions adapting, and new societies emerging. The lesson for our present climate is sobering. Today, humanity is altering the balance not through orbital cycles, but through greenhouse gases. The atmosphere is warming far more quickly than natural cycles alone could account for, and feedback loops are already responding. Melting ice reduces reflectivity, leading to further warming. Thawing permafrost releases methane, amplifying greenhouse effects. Droughts kill forests, turning them from carbon sinks into carbon sources. The same fragility that turned a lush Sahara into desert may accelerate changes in our modern world, only on a much faster timescale. The fragility of climate rhythms also challenges the idea of gradualism. We often imagine climate change as slow, linear, and predictable, but the Sahara reminds us that shifts can be abrupt. Within only a few centuries, lakes the size of countries vanished and dunes replaced grasslands. For us, centuries are long. For the Earth, they're an eye blink. If similar tipping points exist in today's system, in polar ice, in rainforests, in ocean currents, the possibility of sudden transformation is very real. And yet fragility also brings opportunity. If small nudges can turn deserts to savannas, perhaps small interventions can stabilize vulnerable systems today. Protecting forests, restoring wetlands, and reducing emissions may seem like incremental acts, but feedback loops magnify their effects. Just as vegetation reinforced the Green Sahara, modern ecosystems can reinforce a stable climate, if we give them the chance. It is striking to imagine the Sahara not as an anomaly, but as part of Earth's ordinary rhythm. It has flipped between green and dry many times over millions of years, responding faithfully to orbital shifts. What feels fragile to us is, in another sense, simply flexible, a system willing to adapt to the planet's movements. Fragility and resilience are two sides of the same coin. The Sahara collapsed quickly, but given time and the right conditions, it will bloom again. For us, though, the time horizons are different. Civilizations rise and fall in thousands of years. Deserts breathe in tens of thousands. The fragility of climate rhythms matters most to humans, because we live in the narrow slice where these shifts become visible. To Earth, the Sahara's greening and drying are just beats in a song that has played for eons. To us, they are cataclysms and opportunities. This perspective does not diminish the seriousness of modern climate change, but deepens it. We are now participants in these rhythms, not bystanders. Our actions are nudging feedback loops, pushing thresholds, and reshaping the balance. Unlike the slow wobbles of Earth's orbit, our influence is fast and unpredictable. The Sahara teaches us that small changes can cascade into transformations of continents. The question is whether we will treat that knowledge as a warning or ignore it until the tipping points arrive. In the end, the fragility of climate rhythms is both unsettling and awe-inspiring. It shows us that deserts are not fixed, forests are not eternal, and ice is not immovable. It shows us that landscapes we take for granted can flip within centuries, leaving behind memories in fossils, sediments, and bones. It also shows us that Earth is not static but alive, pulsing with cycles that stretch beyond human time. To walk across the Sahara is to walk on the edge of this fragility, across a land that was once a garden, and will be again, all because of the smallest shifts in sunlight and the feedbacks that magnify them. The lesson for today is clear. Stability is precious and it is never guaranteed. What we call climate is, in truth, a balancing act, a rhythm easily disrupted. The Sahara is the proof, its dunes whispering of grasslands long gone and yet to come. In those whispers is both a warning and a reassurance that small changes matter and that the rhythms of the earth will always continue with or without us. The Sahara is often thought of as a place of endings, a desert that consumes everything in its path. Its dunes roll endlessly, swallowing rivers, lakes, and even memories of greener times. To stand within its immensity is to feel dwarfed by silence, by the absence of water and the weight of sun. Yet to call the Sahara only a destroyer is to misunderstand it. The same forces that dry its soils and scatter its dust also give life in unexpected places. The Sahara is paradox embodied, both barren and fertile, both obstacle and bridge, both eternal desert and eternal garden. This duality has always been written into its story. When rains filled its basins, the Sahara fed humans, animals and plants. Hippos wallowed, giraffes browsed among trees, and herders carved cattle onto rock walls. When the monsoon shifted and the rains withdrew, the desert reclaimed what it had given, drying rivers, burying settlements, and scattering people outward to new lands. But even in its drier state, the Sahara is not inert. Its dust fertilizes the Amazon rainforest. Its winds influence hurricanes in the Atlantic. Its silence holds echoes that continue to shape life far beyond its boundaries. What looks like absence is in fact a redistribution, a transformation from local abundance to global reach. Cycles of greening and drying are not accidents, but the natural rhythm of Earth's orbital dance. Every tilt and wobble of the planet changes the balance of sunlight, drawing monsoons northward or pushing them south. In one phase, the Sahara blooms. In another, it hardens into dunes. These swings have repeated countless times over millions of years, each cycle creating opportunities for species, shaping migration routes, and leaving sediments that scientists now read like chapters in a book. The Sahara has been both garden and wasteland more times than we can count. To think of it as permanent desert is to mistake a single note for the whole song. Patience is perhaps the lesson the Sahara teaches most clearly. To the Earth, thousands of years are nothing, a blink in the span of geological time. To humans, they are lifetimes stacked upon lifetimes. What we see as sudden collapse from grassland to desert is, to the planet, only a shift in rhythm. The Sahara reminds us that change is not always fast or dramatic in the human sense, but inevitable in the cosmic sense. Its greening will return someday, though perhaps not while our species is here to see it. Waiting is part of its nature, and yet resilience is also part of its message. Life does not abandon the desert entirely. Seeds can lie dormant in the soil for years, springing to life after rare rains. Acacia trees send roots deep into hidden aquifers, clinging to existence with remarkable tenacity. Humans, too, have never fully left. From Tuareg nomads guiding caravans to modern towns clustered around oases, people continue to find ways to live with the desert rather than against it. The Sahara may seem hostile, but it has always been home to those willing to adapt. The cycles of change written into the Sahara's history also ripple far beyond its borders. When the desert blooms, it encourages human expansion and cultural flourishing. When it dries, it disperses communities, spreading knowledge and traditions outward. Some scholars even argue that the retreat of the Green Sahara played a role in the development of complex societies along the Nile, as displaced herders and farmers settled near the river and contributed to the rise of ancient Egypt. In this way, the Sahara is not only a destroyer of local life, but also a catalyst for broader civilizations. Its dust storms, feared for their choking intensity, also carry nutrients that sustain distant ecosystems. The phosphorus that feeds Amazonian trees, the minerals that enrich Caribbean soils, the iron that fuels plankton blooms in the Atlantic, all of these are gifts carried on winds from the Sahara. The desert strips life away in one place only to scatter its legacy across the planet. That is the essence of its paradox. It takes, but it also gives. To think of the Sahara as both eternal desert and eternal garden is to embrace its complexity. It is not fixed in one state, but oscillates between them, revealing the fragility and resilience of Earth's systems. It destroys in order to create anew, recycles abundance into barrenness and barrenness into abundance, and reminds us that stability is never permanent. Its beauty lies not in constancy, but in transformation. There is also humility to be found in this story. For all our human ingenuity, we remain bound to the same rhythms. Just as Neolithic herders once migrated when the rains failed, modern societies still rely on predictable climates for food, water, and security. The Sahara shows us that no landscape is immune to change, and that adaptation, though difficult, is possible. Its vanished cultures, remembered in pottery shards and rock art, speak not of failure but of resilience, of people who adjusted when their world shifted beneath them. The desert invites us to reflect on the broader patterns of our world. Forests, ice sheets, oceans and deserts all operate on cycles, responding to nudges from orbit, atmosphere, and geology. Each has its own tipping points, its own moments of collapse and renewal. The Sahara is simply the most visible, the most dramatic, a reminder etched in sand that Earth is always in motion. To walk across its dunes is to walk through time. Each ridge of sand is built from grains millions of years old, eroded from ancient mountains, carried by winds that have never stopped blowing. Each basin was once a lake, each dry valley once a river. The silence we hear today is layered with the sounds of hippos splashing, cattle lowing, and children playing at lake shores thousands of years ago. The desert's present identity is only one mask among many, and beneath it lies the memory of gardens. The Sahara, then, is not a contradiction but a continuum. It is destroyer and giver, silence and abundance, permanence and impermanence. Its lessons are not confined to Africa, but extend to the whole planet, reminding us that our world is a web of shifting balances. What is barren today may be fertile tomorrow. What feels eternal may be fleeting. And what appears lifeless may in fact be nurturing life elsewhere. Patience, resilience, and acceptance of change. These are the values the desert whispers. It tells us not to cling too tightly to the illusion of permanence, but to find beauty in transformation. The dunes that now dominate will one day give way to grass again. The rivers that lie buried will flow once more. The Sahara's story is not one of loss alone, but of cycles, of endless renewal and reinvention. In its silence, the Sahara carries the wisdom of ages. It is a place where time feels stretched thin, where the scale of the Earth's rhythms becomes visible. To call it eternal desert or eternal garden is to miss the point. It is both, always both, shifting endlessly between the two. Its patience outlasts our lifetimes, its resilience humbles our ambitions, and its story reminds us that the Earth itself is a restless living thing. The Sahara today is an expanse of silence. From horizon to horizon, it stretches without end, a sea of dunes broken only by rocky plateaus and the occasional green thread of an oasis. To gaze upon it is to feel that it has always been this way, vast, dry, eternal. The desert wears its mask convincingly. Yet hidden beneath its surface, written into its valleys and buried in its sand, is a very different story. For thousands of years, this same land was alive with water and with life. Lakes as large as inland seas shimmered under the sun. Rivers flowed for hundreds of kilometers, carving paths across what now seems only barren earth. Hippos splashed in pools, giraffes browsed on trees, and elephants roamed the grasslands. Human hands shaped pottery, tended cattle, painted images of their world on stone walls. The Sahara was not a desert but a garden, a place of abundance and connection. To look at its dunes today is to stand atop the memory of another world. The silence of the Sahara is deceptive because it is a silence full of echoes. In its rocks and sediments lie the remains of a greener time. Pollen from savannah grasses, shells of freshwater creatures, and bones of animals that could not possibly live here now. In caves and cliffs are artworks that tell us people once swam in its lakes, herded cattle on its plains, and feasted under its skies. Even its dust, carried across the Atlantic by the wind, carries with it a record of vanished lakes and ancient life, nourishing forests and ocean away. The story of the Sahara is not one of permanence, but of change. It has been both fertile and barren many times over the span of millions of years, each shift guided by the slow cycles of Earth's orbit and magnified by the delicate feedbacks of climate. When the planet tilted in one direction, rains poured down and grasslands flourished. When it tilted back, the dunes advanced and silence returned. These cycles remind us that nothing in nature is fixed forever, not even something as immense as the world's largest hot desert. What feels eternal to us is often just one chapter in a longer tale. For the Sahara, that tale is one of transformation. Its patience is geological, measured in millennia rather than decades. To us, the loss of its lakes and rivers was abrupt and catastrophic. To the Earth, it was simply a turn in its rhythm, a breath in its slow cosmic cycle. The desert teaches us humility in the face of deep time. Humans, however, live quickly. We adapt in years, not in thousands of years. When the green Sahara collapsed, people moved, south toward the Sahel, east toward the Nile, north toward the Mediterranean. They didn't vanish, they adapted, carrying their skills, their memories, and their traditions into new lands. The same story is true today. Deserts expand, seas rise, climates shift, and humans, restless and resourceful, respond. We build, we migrate, we invent. In the face of landscapes that move slowly but inexorably, our greatest strength has always been resilience. The Sahara embodies this tension between slowness and quickness, between patience and urgency. It waits for its next cycle of greening, content to let the Earth's orbital wobbles guide its fate. We, in contrast, cannot wait so long. For us, the desert is a lesson in perspective, that the planet changes on scales far beyond our lifetimes, but that our lifetimes are still long enough to feel the impact of those changes. And yet, even in its driest state, the Sahara is not only a place of absence, it gives as well as takes. Its dust fertilizes forests half a world away. Its winds sculpt dunes into forms of astonishing beauty. Its silence offers space for reflection. It is destroyer and giver, eternal desert and eternal garden. In its barrenness lies abundance, redistributed across the globe in ways that remind us of the deep connections binding every ecosystem. To walk across the Sahara today is to walk on layers of memory. Each grain of sand was once part of a mountain or carried by a river. Each dune has shifted countless times, burying tools, bones and seeds beneath its slopes. Each gust of wind is part of a rhythm that stretches back thousands of years and will continue thousands more into the future. The desert is never still. It only appears so. The hidden story of the Sahara is ultimately a story about change and about patience. Grasslands become deserts. Deserts become grasslands. Rivers carve valleys and then vanish, only to return in another age. People arrive, thrive, and move on. Nothing is wasted, everything is transformed. In the end, the Sahara is not an empty place, but a reminder that all landscapes are temporary, all climates fragile, and all stories part of a longer whole. And so, as the desert lies quiet tonight, its dunes bathed in starlight, we can reflect on what it teaches. Patience, because the earth moves slowly. Resilience, because humans adapt quickly. Wonder, because beneath the silence of sand lies the memory of rivers, elephants, and communities who called it home. The Sahara may seem timeless, but even the sands remember. Tonight, the desert is quiet, and so are you.